Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me here at Denver Open Media in Denver. We're actually in the heart of the Santa Fe Art District, where until very recently I was resident artist at the Denver Photo Art Gallery. Just a fantastic location. There's really thriving art community here, so I'm delighted to be back in this venue, which does so much to give back to the community and artists alike. And I'm very grateful to Michael Bliss for inviting me along to talk to you all, and pleased that so many of you showed up, so thanks for coming. Before I kick off, my name's Scott Wilson, and the name of the photography that I describe is Wilson Axby. So I thought it was just worth explaining the difference in the name there. So if you type my name, Scott Wilson, into Google, maybe page 456, you might find me. My wife's surname, Ione, who's in the front row here, is Axby. And if you put Wilson Axby together, I guarantee I'm first when you search Wilson Axby in Google. So that was the simple way of just connecting the family names and giving us a distinctive look. So hopefully one day my children, who are called Wilson Axby, will overtake that in search on Google. This photo, incidentally, is a seascape scene from northern Spain, just outside Bilbao. It's a place called Barrica. This picture is called Chasing the Dragon. It was one of the first images that really broke me through in terms of recognition. So it's the front page of my website, hence the introduction today, but it's one of the sort of the pictures I have a very strong emotional connection to. I also have a strong emotional connection to each of these pictures, which is the inside cover, if you like, of the website. But I wanted to talk to you about the values which sit behind this, which are adventure, professionalism, growth, adaptability, and persistence. These are all values which I believe have really driven me through my 20-year career in photography, but also life. And as we go through this talk, you'll realize that there's a few hurdles and milestones and different breakthroughs on the way. I've always started with a sense of adventure, even before I had a camera, this desire to explore and pursue my curiosity. Professionalism is something I've always tried to apply to my photography, be that through the club environment, etc. I've always tried to improve and grow myself as a photographer. Adaptability really comes through in some of the challenges and setbacks that I've had, and still persisted, if you like, in terms of trying to get better and become a real pro. I shared these values with a school class recently. I was invited to do a very similar talk to this, a very well-known Denver high school, and I shared the values with the class teacher and said, "Is this the sort of thing that you want me to convey to the students?" He said, "Well, yeah, but what I'd really love is if you get them to get their coursework in on time." And I felt that was kind of overstepping my remit as a teacher that day, but hopefully we managed to persuade them to take photography a little bit more seriously. This picture here of a stag, it's called Black Prince, is symbolic of my real beginnings as a photographer, which take you back 20 years ago to just outside Glasgow in Scotland, where I was born. My wife and I were already together at that point, and we wanted a little bit more of a sort of rural environment, so we moved outside of Glasgow to a place called Symington. It was this wonderful old derelict country estate, and someone had taken it upon themselves to convert the stables into these lovely little cottages, and we were just settling into this beautiful rural lifestyle. I was washing the dishes one night, and I looked out the back window and I saw these two glaring eyes staring back at me of a beautiful stag, and I was like, "Where's my camera?" And of course my wife's saying, "You don't have a camera, you're not a photographer." So that photo that I showed you is certainly not the scene from that evening. The scene from that evening would not have been something I'd have been proud to show photographically. But it really stimulated this desire to get much closer to the environment I was in and the things that I was witnessing. I worked in an agency at the time in Glasgow, a communications agency, and we had lots of photographers on the books. So I just asked one of them, "What's a really good kind of top-end amateur camera, something I can learn on before I sort of professionalize, if you like?" So the recommendation was a Nikon F65, and I've stuck with Nikon to this day. I'm not one of these Nikon better than Canon kind of guys, though. It just happens to be the brand I started with. To me, it's a bit like BMW, Mercedes, Audi. They're all brilliant. So whether you've got a Nikon, a Canon, Sony are absolutely fantastic brand these days. So I'm not here to sell you Nikon, it's just what I use. Nottingham Outlaws Photographic Society. Not long after we had moved to Scotland, I was actually invited to move down south. My day job, if you like, is in brewing and we moved down to relocate near the largest brewery in England. And I took the passion for photography with me and really saw a chance to start to learn more, educate myself. And if for those of you that are on that journey, I can't recommend getting into the club environment enough. It really sort of took me up that level in terms of education. I don't know if you know Nottingham, you probably know that's where Robin Hood is from, and nearly every kind of club in Nottingham has some kind of arrow design at the back of them. So that was the effort here, to try and mix the lens in a camera and an arrow in that design. What I wanted to show you, you don't start off as a great photographer, and these are what I describe as examples of when I went through the withering scrutiny of a club judge. I don't know if you know how judges in clubs mark or score. In the UK at least, they tend to start with a maximum score of 20. Sometimes it's 10 here. And then they basically whittle points off until you get down to what you deserve. So when you go into your sort of first few club competitions and come away with an 8, it can be quite deflating. You've really got to sort of build yourself back up again. But I thought it was worth just showing a few images so you can see some of the errors that you start to have to deal with before you get on a better track. So kind of top left here, if you like, is this wonderful scene of longhorn cattle in Nottinghamshire. The foreground, according to the judge, is far too dark, and Scott, that sky is just so blown out. You'd never see that in an exhibition. So you're starting to think, how do I balance images? How do I make that light and dark come together a little bit better? And that's where things like graduated ND filters can really start to help you. If you look top right, again, I was delighted to show this beautiful black and white seascape scene from northern Spain. First thing the club judge says is your horizon's out. The horizon doesn't go down like that. So it's these little things to always watch out for when you're trying to correct yourself, and just to look for imperfections. Bottom left is the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation Scotland building, which is in Glasgow. And again, I was delighted with the blues and the vibrancy coming through there. I'm very proud of this image. And of course, the first criticism is the verticals don't go like that in real life. They need to be straight. So again, you start to think through the eyes of an architect, and how do I stop verticals converging in an image? And then bottom right is a beautiful church scene in Salamanca in the centre of Spain, near Madrid. And I was delighted to capture the lights illuminating the stonework, etc. And again, club judges straight in there and said, I can see absolutely no detail at all in those black areas. So again, I don't put these up there as signs of failure. I've never seen this as an exercise in failure. This is an exercise in improvement and education and getting better and basically mastering your craft. And once you start to master your craft, you get onto a sort of far more professional bent. So this was an old abandoned wireworks in Derbyshire in England. And just managing the light, understanding the construct, making the doors work for you, moving the door so it just fills that diagonal angle in the foreground and actually works for you. So again, that started to get me on the track of becoming a more successful photographer. I then bought a wide angle lens and kind of used it here as a little bit of a macro. This image was published in Digital Photographer magazine in the UK, and again, it's real exaggerated feel that you've got from the wrench, but the killer is just that little drop of oil on the end of the spout that's about to drop in there. So again, just think about how you can really dramatize images to give you that publishable quality. This scene is from a church in the center of France, and we were very privileged. We had friends that had a house nearby this church, and they introduced me to the lady who held the keys to this crypt in this church. And I was able to befriend her and get an invitation into the church, and there was no one there. On a normal day, this would have been flooded with tourists. I was already shaking with almost the excitement of being able to have this church to myself. Went into this crypt, and the chair wasn't there. The chair was in the corner. And again, the encouragement here is to be creative with your environment and really look for better opportunities. I must have shot that chair 200 times in different locations, different heights, just getting the light right until I came across, the arch seam with the chair just to the right angle. So again, don't just go into an environment and assume that it's static and you can't play with it. I think just taking your imagination and creativity alongside that can really pay dividends. I also started to look at portraiture, which is really not a genre that I had taken on before. I think the advice here is to master your craft and really develop a skill in multiple genre if you can. If you're competitive, like I am, and you want to win a club competition, you could be the best portrait photographer in the world, but you wouldn't win a club competition over multiple genres. So I've really tried to develop a skill set across multiple genre, and here portraiture again was opportunism has played a role here as well. This was an old railway worker that was looking after or tending and restoring locomotives in a museum near Nottingham. I just introduced myself, befriended the chap. We got talking, and he was delighted to have his portrait taken, and keep telling me stories as we went through. So again, this portrait was published in Digital Photographer as well as doing well in club competitions. Moody monos are always something that do well in club competitions. The scene on the left is a lighthouse scene from the north coast of Yorkshire in England. This scene is now inaccessible. There was basically storms about 3 or 4 years ago, and it broke that piece of land off from the sea, so you can only access it by boat. So again, just taking advantage of scenes when you can, be spontaneous, get out there and just shoot when you can. I'm delighted with this image, especially as it's now one that would almost be impossible to achieve. The right image there is again about taking advantage of spontaneous conditions. And that's actually a cricket ground in England, so very like baseball ground here, and it was basically had suffered through 3 days of torrential rain, and the ground was absolutely flooded. So it's a real opportunity for a wonderful piece of long exposure, but I needed some foreground, and that bench wasn't there, so I basically walked back to the clubhouse and then dragged that bench all the way across to the other side of the cricket ground. So again, take advantage, create the scenes, don't just shoot necessarily what's there. If anyone's interested, that exposure would have been about 2 minutes. I'll talk a lot more about wildlife later and the impact that that's had on my career as a photographer, but again in the UK I was very privileged to live about 3 or 4 hours from an area called the Farne Islands, just off the northeast coast of England, and every year the puffins congregate there. Shooting a puffin in flight is one of the hardest things you can ever still. They are like bullets. Shooting a puffin in flight with sand eels in its mouth is even harder, and that really felt the holy grail. So again, if you're interested in settings, that was shot around 1/5000th of a second. There's still blur in that puffin's wings. So that just shows how fast these things are moving. If 1/5000th of a second can't completely freeze that bird. Along at the other end of the spectrum, and again, this is about understanding different genre, we have the slow end of panning, if you like. So this is a British Superbikes competition, like GP motorsports that you have here. And this would have been shot at 120th of a second. So you're basically trying to track the bike and stay level with it and just still the bike and have as much sense of speed and motion and blur in the background as possible. Again, the cutting room floor is absolutely covered with failed attempts to get this. There was probably one shot out of 250 that you get absolutely spot on. So just perseverance is a real big part of that. Slowing down even further, this was shot at about 1/80th of a second. So this is 3 race horses in training in a racing stables in the Midlands in England. And I was very privileged to be invited along there, and again shot every speed you can imagine from completely freezing there. But there was just something about catching these horses at that kind of blurry, emotional, dramatic, almost that very tense moment. And again, that's been published in digital photography magazines in the UK. So really push boundaries and think about different ways to bring a scene to life. Sometimes luck plays its part as well. Every year with my day job, I go to New York and we talk to the stock exchange about the performance of the business. I'm the guy that bothers all my colleagues because I've got the massive suitcase with all my camera gear alongside it as well. And this particular year I'd flown in from the UK. I got up at 3 in the morning, bleary-eyed, got my gear and trudged down to Brooklyn Bridge. So I'm standing on the Manhattan side of Brooklyn Bridge looking towards Brooklyn, and I could not believe my eyes. Nestled in the sand under Brooklyn Bridge was an abandoned grand piano. I mean, I just, to this day, I can't believe my luck, and basically shot that scene to death So this is probably in my portfolio the shot I'd say is one of the most unique, in the sense it could just never be repeated again, unless of course someone planted a grand piano there. I've seen photos since. The piano was actually started its life there as a much more new looking object, and then just deteriorated and decayed over time. So I feel again lucky that I was there in that moment, or 2-day period, when I think the piano, if you like, was just looking destroyed enough to really add some drama to that image. So very proud of that one. Of course, I've been back every year since and only been disappointed that there's no piano there. As well as props, thinking about creativity and you know what's in your kit bag. As a seascaper, I had been very accustomed to using graduated filters. That's depicted by the leaf filter there on the right. And I had this flash gun that I wasn't really using that often, the odd piece of portrait work, and it just occurred to me, what happens if you put a flash gun and a graduated filter together? Not something I'd ever seen happen. And the result for me was a real chance to push boundaries and create what I believe at the time was a relatively new genre. I haven't seen many images like this, where you've got this total drama of the dark sky from the graduate filter and then this blast of flash in the foreground. And it really helped me to break through from the club scene, if you like, into a far sort of media profiled area. So there's a number of magazines in the UK really saw this as a new way of shooting, and published a few features around dramatic flowerscapes, as I called them. It's a genre that I still work on today, and the sunflowers that you see here were actually just shot 2 months ago in a field near the airport, Denver Airport in Colorado. Just again, the fields look nothing as dramatic as that. So it's the things that you can bring to your game, if you like, through creativity and kit and bringing them together. What that did allow me to do, though, is really break through in the UK, and the images actually made it into the final of the Landscape Photographer of the Year in the UK. There was 4 dramatic flowerscapes got through to the final, and this particular one, which is called Rojo, which is simply red in Spanish, made it into the final, if that makes sense. It was published in the Landscape Photographer of the Year final yearbook, selected by the Sunday Times in the UK as one of their sort of published works. And I think the point here is about the novelty and the different angle. I have many typical landscapes, if you like, in my portfolio, but it was doing something different that actually broke through here and made the difference, and actually allowed me to break through a little bit. I was very pleased just last year when the Landscape Photography at UK brought out a 10th anniversary special edition, and they wrote to me and said that my Rojo image had made it into that kind of best of the best book, so that was a real sort of high point of pride in my career. That breakthrough really started to give me sort of 3 or 4 years of success in that competition. And I'll be honest, these are more typical landscapes, if you like, than the flowerscapes that broke through. This was a scene from Hartland Quay, which is a very rough sea area in Cornwall in the southeast of England. I think the closest parallel I would draw is Oregon in the sort of Pacific northwest here. And again, this was one of those days you thought, do you know what, the sky's not doing anything, it's not happening, it's raining, and yet you still shoot. Still see what's out there, see what happens, and came back with this just sort of tormented sea, if you like, and that broke through. So that then toured Britain as part of the Landscape Photography of the Year sort of touring portfolio. The following year, I was back in my home country, Scotland. This is an image of Black Rock Cottage, which is a very iconic scene by day. It's I would liken this to Maroon Bells in terms of the kind of fame and notoriety of this scene. And we have seen hundreds of pictures of the Black Rock Cottage in front of that mountain, which is called Buachai Etive Mór, which is Gaelic. But at that point, although night photography is probably quite common now, this scene hadn't really been shot much at night. So I stayed in the hotel nearby, had a couple of whiskies in the bar before sort of setting out at 3 in the morning just as the stars and the clouds all kind of converged, the moon was illuminating Black Rock Cottage, and I was basically had these square miles to myself, and just felt absolutely blissful sort of taking that shot. And again, to get that kind of coverage and reward is fantastic. Back down to Wales, this is a scene called Penman Lighthouse, which is in Anglesey, which is an island part of Wales. And again, just trying to think about not just a picture of a lighthouse, but how do you create a picture? So this is really about the seaweed in the foreground here, and bringing that to life dramatically through a long exposure. This would have been absolutely pitch black. I'm walking about in sea waders and a torch, you can't see a thing. So it's allowing the light through a long exposure to really do a lot of the work for you. The magazine on the left of the image is Advanced Photographer, and the editor, Will Chung, reached out to me and said, look, we've seen some of your work coming through, we'd like to do a feature on your coastal photography. So that became a 10-page feature in Advanced Photography again. So just allowed you to kind of break through to that other level there, and really started to define me in my own mind as a seascaper, which was kind of ironic because I lived in Nottingham, which is the farthest you can get from the sea anywhere in the UK. And it's kind of ironic now that we live in Colorado, which is the farthest you can get from the sea anywhere in the United States. But I still have this passion to get back to the coast as often as possible. This is not a self-portrait. This was shot by a very good friend and photographer called Sergio in northern Spain. So that's just a couple of miles from the shot that I showed you in the very first scene. So I mentioned my career earlier. I work for Molson Coors brewing company, which is the reason that we're here in Colorado today. I also sit on a global alcohol responsibility board called the International Alliance of Responsible Drinking. The point there is not to talk about my day job, it's more the privilege, if you like, of travel that's given me, and it's really allowed me to travel all over the world and help really, for me, build a genre around travel photography, which is a really massive part of my portfolio. So we have breweries in Canada. Clearly that's the Molson part of Molson Coors. So that's a picture of Toronto. Don't ever go to Toronto without going to the island that faces it. Toronto Island is just a spectacular little island. It's a real kind of hippie environment, but the views back to Toronto are absolutely stunning. In 2012, we bought a number of breweries in Central Europe. So I was actually based in Prague for 2 years. Again, just photographer's dreams, you know, doing your day job and being able to set out at night and shoot the famous Charles Bridge at all times. This is a 4-minute exposure just after sunrise with, for those that know them, it's called a Lee Big Stopper, which is basically a 10-stop blackout filter, which is pitch black, you can't see through it. You have to kind of compose and set your image before you put the filter in, because you just can't see through. The inspiration for these was actually welders' glasses, the ones that they use to protect their eyes from sparks. So it's just an interesting piece of innovation there. I was recently at an alcohol responsibility conference in Singapore. Absolutely stunning environment. Again, a great chance for me to develop seascapes. This is back at the exact same spot as the grand piano that I showed you earlier. So it just shows you it's worth returning to the same spot again and again. Completely different image, completely different feel, exact same spot. So I will always go back there and see what I can get. Interestingly, I've been accused a few times of placing those groins through Photoshop. I actually don't use Photoshop. I use a tool called Lightroom, but in terms of blending images, I've never done it. I wouldn't even know how to put the groins in there. So this is all very much as it would appear. What I loved about that picture was the wrought iron that's just surrounding, we call them groins, the sort of posts that sit in the water there, and it almost looked like snakes that were sitting around there. But again, that would be about a 1-minute exposure just before dawn. Alcohol Responsibility Group took me back to Turkey, so this was a scene in Istanbul, and what I was trying to emulate there is the shot that I'm about to show you next. In London there's a very famous, iconic or cliched scene, if you like, having a bus running past Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. So I was like, how can I bring that to life here? Found this beautiful mosque and then this large bus basically driving past. That would be about a 4-second exposure just to capture the motion of the bus as it moved through. And here is the shot that inspired that, if you like. So again, it really has become a cliche, but I think there's something in us as photographers that we have to get these out of our system before we start to look for other innovative ways to shoot. So again, this will be about 2 to 3 seconds. The trick here is not to have the blur so long that you lose the building behind it. You've got to have the bus and the building and the people and the light. So again, experimentation. One night that could be 2 seconds, another night it could be 10, but just indulge yourself in making many, many mistakes before you go away with that final brilliant image. And get creative. This is the Lloyd's building in London, and I'm basically lying on my back, looking up, directly up with a wide angle lens. I had a tap on the shoulder by security who were a little bit curious about what was going on there, but after I showed them the image and that I wasn't a terrorist threat, they allowed me to carry on shooting. This is also good use of the white balance in your camera. So I've got this white balance as cold as possible to really bring out the blues of the steel. So again, this is pretty much as you see it in the camera. It's less about what's being processed afterwards. The blue that you see on the screen is the blue that I saw in the camera that evening. This is Tokyo Harbour. I was lucky enough to go there last year for another meeting. Again, Tokyo, absolutely splendid place. Getting Tokyo Harbour in one shot is almost impossible. So I had to go behind buildings, go through gates, etc., until I could find that really sort of clear shot of Tokyo Harbour from that angle. So again, you've got to almost work your craft and make the effort to find those scenes. Of course, working in the brewing business for Molson Coors, it brought me back to Denver often. I'm very proud of this shot. It was actually shot about 12 miles south of Denver from Cherry Creek State Park. So this is a shot that any of you can get. You need a long lens. You're not going to get this with an iPhone. I think that was about 400 millimeters. But because of the Bronco colors there, the Denver Broncos got very excited about that picture, and that was on their Instagram page, and it got something like 30,000 hits in a day. As I say, I mean, I love Denver, and we were lucky enough in August 2015 to make what I still think of as my dream career move to Denver. This is actually the view from my office, which is in the 48th floor of the Transamerica building at 18th in California. So again, it's just the privilege, if you like, of being able to look out the window any given day and just judge whether the light is different or the weather's right to achieve a shot like that. So we've moved to Colorado. The family's all moved over. We're all settled in, having a great time just exploring Colorado. I mean, it's an absolute landscaper's dream, and I'm sure my boss, when he offered me the job, and there was a big grin on my face, he knew it wasn't just about moving to a new brewing location, but just the amazing palette that is Colorado for shooting. So we spent the first year just traveling, getting to know Colorado. This is a beautiful aspen grove just outside of Crested Butte in Colorado. Completely different time of the day, probably 12 hours later. This is also an old barn in Crested Butte where you've got the Milky Way just sort of eating its way into the back there. Again, though, it's taking advantage of our environmental conditions. This is pitch black. I cannot see a thing. I've got a little flashlight to illuminate the front of the building here, but it occurred to me that every 10 minutes or so there was a lorry or a truck coming down the main road, which was only about 50 yards from the scene, and it was just illuminating the side of the building there. So taking advantage of that, building it into your image rather than seeing it as a problem, and it actually came out with a much better illuminated image than I would have had without the truck. So take advantage of what might be seen as problems otherwise. This is the industrial end of the scale. This is a scene from Commerce City, which is just a fantastically vibrant industrial scene. To me, the sort of real kind of industrial beauty is just as dramatic and awe-inspiring as an amazing landscape. And just getting the sort of central verticals there working through the middle of that scene is really what made it. And actually that is my most hit image on Flickr, with well over 150,000 hits to date. So you can find scenes, you can find beauty anywhere as long as you go out and search. The only thing I'd warn you if you go around Commerce City is be very, very aware of where you're trespassing and where you're not. There are boundaries, and there will be security there. So just, exercise caution. And then take advantage. This is one of those real kind of seasonal collision shots, which I call seasonal adjustment. And it's basically, it was October, clearly, but with the pumpkins. Now, as Coloradans, you're not surprised that it would snow in the middle of October, but to me, this was a big surprise. And to drive past this scene of the old pumpkin truck with the snow falling, I was literally driving. I wasn't out looking for this scene at all. Screeched a hire car to a halt, jumped out, and just shot this from the hard shoulder of a road. So it might look like a carefully thought through, planned out scene, but this was about being spontaneous and taking advantage of an opportunity that was just put right in front of me. Now, whether you're allowed to stop in the hard shoulder, what the police might have said, I don't know, but it was certainly worth it, and certainly one of my most popular images to date as well. This is up in Steamboat Springs. Now, many of you probably know of the Moore Barn, which is in Steamboat Springs. It's probably one of the most shot barns in the United States. The barn is actually just stage left, if you like, off to the left of the screen. And it was one of the icons, the cliches. I was very, very keen to shoot it. Went out at 4 in the morning, well before dawn. Had the place to myself, but it was strewn with footprints from tourists and visitors the day before. And just turned and just saw this absolutely stunningly beautiful icing on the cake scene with not a famous barn, but a beautiful barn all the same. And that's better than any shot I could have taken of Moore Barn that day. The thing in the story here is that it was so cold. It was minus 25 in my scale, which is centigrade, and my tripod shattered. The tripod was probably 3 feet deep in the snow, if you like. And just the cold must have just gone up the carbon fibre legs. And before I knew it, I just saw that it just freeze like that and shatter. At that point, I'm not worried about the tripod. I'm worried about the picture. I'm thinking, I need to hold my camera steady for 30 seconds. And I'm basically just clinging onto the head, onto the tripod, and hoping it'll stay together. And luckily, it did. Of course, the real sting is that image cost me about $1,000 by the time I'd replaced the tripod. But it's worth it, and it was one of my best-selling images in the Denver Photo Art Gallery here, so one I'm very pleased with. I'll talk about a couple of breakthroughs. I talked about the dramatic flowerscapes earlier. This was another breakthrough, my first really in Colorado, if you like. I woke up one morning, I live about 10, 12 miles south of Denver, and I just looked out the window and I could kind of see it just looked a little bit misty, which is very unusual for Denver. You know yourselves, it's such a dry environment. I thought, whoa, if there's mist kind of building in Denver, I've got to get up to my office. So I got in the car, drove like a bat out of hell up to the office, and I could actually see the mist rising as I was up there. I managed to get up to the 48th floor before sunrise, and just was absolutely gobsmacked when this scene folded out in front of me. So you've got the mist rising there, you've got the sun coming out behind it, dramatic clouds, and it was just absolute perfection. I must have shot every single window, every single angle I possibly could for about an hour and a half that morning. But there was this 15-second moment when that sun is just popping through and illuminating everything that just kind of made it all worthwhile. When I say breakthrough, it was the media recognition. So 303 magazine, which is a real sort of popular lifestyle magazine in Denver, took advantage of a number of photographers that had managed to be out early enough to capture this misty scene, if you like. And as you can see, I covered every angle there, from the mist rising while it was pitch black outside. The top left there, that's just the aerial at the top of the Four Seasons Hotel, if you couldn't recognize it there. And they did a really nice feature through their magazine, and it was on the kind of weather sections of a number of TV stations as well. So that's when I felt I really managed to sort of plant my name, if you like, in Colorado a little bit more, and things kind of grew from there. I was named Denver's best Instagrammer last year by Westward magazine. They did a number of features there. So started to feel I was getting the same traction, if you like, in Denver that I had in the UK as a landscape photographer. And then came the invitation to move into Denver Photo Art Gallery. Was run by John Fielder, so probably Colorado's most famous landscape artist, and he would sponsor maybe 8 to 10 resident artists, and it was just an absolute wonderful time. I would I had my landscape photography display, and you'd have visitors coming through every first Friday of the month for the Santa Fe Art District Walk, and it was just a brilliant way to really sort of land in Colorado and expose my work. And then this big red light hit. I sometimes get emotional when I tell this, but just as things, we've landed in Colorado, things are going great, the photography's working well, the career's fantastic, and I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. This is in August 2016. As a 48-year-old, I was below the age. The standard age for screening, if you like, for colorectal cancer is 50. So I was younger than that age. My mother had actually died at 59 from colorectal cancer. So you could say I'd had fair warning that this was a possibility. And I had actually been screened in the UK at 45 and was basically given a false negative. 3 years later, when symptoms were a little bit more clear, I'd already advanced to stage 4. That just gives you a little bit of history about why I ended up where I was. And I've got to be honest, when you're sitting in an oncologist waiting room and he tells you you've got stage 4 cancer, photography is not the first thing on your mind. But after a while, I did start to reconsider, how we're getting through this and how do I keep shooting. And that's when my oncologist explained, one of the drugs you're on, which incidentally I'm still on today, is called panitumumab. And if you go out in sunshine, your face is going to flare up red and you'll come out in spots. So, just enjoy Colorado's 300 days of sunshine in the shade. So as a landscape photographer who loves getting up for sunrises and strolling through, moving to Colorado for the sunshine alone is enough of incentive. And suddenly this blessing turned to a curse. So after we'd kind of reconciled my treatment, how we were going to get through that, I really started to think, well, how do I keep shooting? How do I keep that passion alive? And it just occurred to me that we have an absolute abundance of state parks and nature and beauty on our doorstep. And the way you access these is through your car. So for that year through my treatment, I was on chemotherapy for 40 weeks. The seat of my car basically became my mobile studio. And I've got to be honest, they often say some of the most innovative ideas come from looking through a kind of the eyes of a disability, if you like. And I had a disability at that point. And I think through that learning process, I realized the backseat of my car was the best place to shoot, whether I had this challenge or not. Now you might say, why the backseat and not the front? It's after a few times of trying to vault a gear stick with a 400mm lens in your hand, you kind of learn to locate yourself and get into the back seat as quickly as possible. Another side effect of chemotherapy, for those that may know, is neuropathy. So to this day, up to about here, my legs feel like they constantly have pins and needles, as do my hands, up to probably about there. It's just this constant numbness, if you like. And I found that that numbness meant I was missing shots. I was trying to push the shutter and realized I was just hitting the corner of the camera. I couldn't feel the shutter. So I just put a little paint spot on the shutter release, and it was acted like a braille dot, if you like. And so it meant I was never able to miss those shots. Again, it's through that disability that I think there's probably a piece of innovation there that camera companies might want to think about. And it just introduced me to a whole new genre. I talked about shooting puffins earlier, but wildlife really wasn't a big part of my camera kit, if you like. And I just explored, and despite the massive setback, I can't underestimate the setback that stage 4 cancer is, I was able to find therapy and light, if you like, through that period. And I befriended, or I thought I befriended, this little owl. And this is a burrowing owl, which is just an absolute fantastic little creature. This owl is only about that big. He lived, I say he because it was a he was guarding the nest for his companion. They lived about 2 miles from our house, and after work, I worked through chemotherapy with my little bag, and I would drive home, and just my escape, if you like, was to go and visit this owl on the way home. I became convinced that he'd befriended me and got comfortable and almost looked forward to my visit, which of course he didn't. Every day he was outside this nest, and then one day there was the inevitable hawk circling, and I went back the next day and he wasn't there, and I went back the next day and he wasn't there. I probably went through this process for about a week before I had to accept the owl was gone. So that's one of the sadder tales from that period, but I'm afraid that is the circle of life. It just gave me, again, just this great introduction to a new genre. You probably see coyotes all the time. To me, this was an exotic animal. You know, this was like coming across a wolf. This is Cherry Creek State Park. So again, this is an urban park on our doorsteps, and you're seeing this wonderful nature. So if you haven't already appreciated it, please get out there and just see it for what it is. The most exotic thing for me was hummingbirds. I don't know if you're aware, but hummingbirds don't exist in Europe at all. So this was a complete novelty for me, a complete eye-opener. And again, to be able to capture, you know, a hummingbird at speed through the window of your car was just an absolute dream and a delight, and just this great escape through a very tough time. So again, this would have been 1/3200th of a second, maybe 1/4000th. That wing is still blurring. I mean, that just shows how fast these little birds move. But absolutely beautiful. And now it's something I look forward to every year, is, you know, when the hummingbirds come back. Apologies if you have a sensitive nature. Again, just nature at work. This is a mother badger who I watched leave her set and return with a prairie dog probably 4 times in the space of 45 minutes. She had 4 absolutely ravenous cubs who were just pestering her all the time. She'd come out and she just slumped, absolutely exhausted, in front of the set with the 4th prairie dog. And the kids are out just, you know, rustling her up and getting her to go out again. So this poor mother worked so hard for that prairie dog there. But again, it's just this wonderful moment of nature if you can capture that. This whole process, over the course of maybe 40 weeks of chemo, I built a portfolio of wildlife which clearly wasn't the same volume that I'd built in terms of landscapes over the past 10 or 15 years, but in quality it certainly felt like it was up there. And it struck me that this maybe was my opportunity, if you like, to give back to the cancer community, which was doing so much to look after me. By this point, I still have cancer, but we're getting kind of good news every scan, if you like. The scans had started in a terrible place. First scan was 50% reduction. Second scan was reduction again. So I'm starting to feel a little bit of optimism at that point, and really, like many cancer sufferers, think, how can I give back to the community that has done so much for me? So I had an idea to produce a book, inevitably called Through the Window, given that's how I was shooting. And I spoke to a friend, dear friend, Kevin Holliday, who was in a camera club with me at the time. Said, I've got this idea, could be a way of giving back. And he said, I love the idea, and in fact, I'll support you. And Kevin came on board and helped me design the book. So I put the words and pictures together, and he helped with the layout. We still had the challenge of how do you launch a book? So I first went to the Colorectal Cancer Alliance and explained to them I wanted to produce this book. Did they want to be a partner? And said we'd love to be a beneficiary, but you need to sort of bring us a finished product, if you like. So I ran a Kickstarter campaign. If you don't know what Kickstarter is, it's a way of getting funding, crowdfunding, for projects to get off the ground. Kevin and I found a printer who very generously gave us a great deal on print, partly because the printer had his own cancer story. And like I'm sure everyone in this room has a cancer story, either personally or through friends or family. And I've just found this community that sits around that has just this amazing tie and bond. So people just leaned in and just wanted to help. It was absolutely magnificent. And Kickstarter was no different. I only needed $7,000 to get the book printed. And within a week we had 12,000. Now that sounds like a great result, but it was actually a problem because you can't raise money for charity on Kickstarter. You can only raise money for a product. So we actually had to slow things down and say, no more money. Wait till the book's out and you can buy it then, kind of thing. So that was just a fantastic start to the whole process. And then came the question, you know, when do you launch this thing? And I was quite determined to present a very healthy, optimistic outlook. I had not mentioned my illness once on social media. Clearly friends and family and colleagues knew. But over the course of the year's treatment, I've probably got 12 to 15,000 followers on social media, and I hadn't mentioned this at all. So I kind of conspired that the day I was better or felt better, or really felt like I turned a corner was the day I launched the book. And luckily enough, just literally a year after being told I had stage 4 cancer, this will set me off again. Yainu and I had the news that I was cancer free in August 2017. The expression that you use in America is NED, or no evidence of disease. What you probably don't know, in my homeland of Scotland, NED actually means non-educated delinquent. So, so when I chose to announce my illness and the fact that I was a Ned on the same day, people weren't really quite sure how to take that. So the picture bottom right is my father and I. So my father's 82, 83. He'd already lost his first wife, my mother, to colon cancer, and clearly was desperately concerned that he was going to lose his son as well. So I was able to detour from a trip through Europe to have a pint with my dad in Edinburgh last year and just celebrate being cancer free. So then to the cause. So Through the Window became a real kind of cause for me, and an opportunity to give back and raise money for the Colorectal Cancer Alliance. The media response, if you like, was another photographic breakthrough. The response from Colorado media was absolutely tremendous. You know, Denver 9 News, 7 News, Fox News, all wanted to run this story. And there is nothing as powerful as a cancer recovery story for giving people hope. And I was very proud and happy to sort of put myself in that place and do that for the cause. One of the things that was very celebratory for me, though, was I was actually on a business trip to Japan, and I got a call from an unknown number in what was late at night there, and it was a newspaper back in Scotland called the Sunday Mail, which is Scotland's biggest selling newspaper. And through no Scottish connections at all, the lady journalist basically covers cancer stories, and had tracked my story down through Facebook and said, we'd love to do a feature on you. So to this day, we've still got this double page spread of my images in the Sunday Mail. Now, interestingly, if you can see the picture of the puffin here, that's clearly not been shot through the window of my car. There was a little bit of a mix-up, and the photo editor said, can you send just a bunch of images from your book and also just some images that you're really proud of? So I sent them all, and however that got mixed up, the puffin became part of the Through the Window spread. So I had a lot of friends saying, oh, so how did you get your BMW X5 onto that little island off the northeast coast of England? So I did have a little bit of explaining to do. Inevitably, people ask you, what's your favourite picture in the book? And it's like asking, you know, who's your favourite child when you've got so many. But to me, actually, this picture did stand out. And part is the emotion for me of, again, finding something that to me was so exotic as a hummingbird in Colorado. But really, it's the fact that of all the pictures in the book, this is the one that could sit in a general photography book, not just a book of wildlife. And it's about symmetry. So again, you know, just finding something that just gives an image, that element of transcension, if you like. And for me, it was the symmetry of this hummingbird. And it was a beautiful way for me to capture my recovery. A new genre was to achieve the front cover of Colorado Outdoors Photography Edition in 2017. So that was a really nice sort of culmination, celebration of the book, purely for its photography, not for the fact that it was working also as a cancer fundraiser. So now I'm delighted to say I'm over a year in the clear. I'm still in treatment at the moment. I go every 2 weeks to have a maintenance drug called panitumumab, which ironically is the one that still keeps my face red, so I have to still be very careful in the sun. I was down in the sand dunes just last week. If you haven't been, you have to go. It's an absolutely extraordinary place in Colorado. And now I go out in the sun, I've got a balaclava up to there and a hat down to there, so I often have the kind of red band across there, but just have to still be very careful, but out and feeling fit and acting normally. And it's just allowed us to get back on the road again. So wildlife was absolutely my place of sanctuary through my illness, and I have not left that behind. I still love shooting wildlife, but I have been able to get back onto that landscape path again. And this was a trip that we made not long after my recovery last year to the White Sands in New Mexico. Really long drive and an absolutely delightful treasure at the end of it. So if you haven't been to White Sands, it's just the most spectacular place. We managed to get a photographer's pass to go in before sunrise. You pay a little bit extra, but it's absolutely worth it. I was accused by many people of breaking in or staying after hours, but it's actually something you can do through the White Sands authorities yourself, is get that early pass. So if sunrises are your thing, then I'd urge you to do it. This was this summer back in northern Spain again, and again this was an emotional scene for me. So this forest, and again this is not the type of scene you would often see in Colorado because it's so dry here. This is probably more typical of Oregon or Washington. And there's almost this permanent mist or moisture in this forest, hence this just absolutely wonderfully vivid moss that grows on the trees. But the emotional part for me was I had been there with two friends, Jesus and Sergio, who shot the Seascaper shot earlier, probably a month before the scan that discovered I had stage 4 cancer. And that's when I really started to get the clues that something was wrong. So it just felt very wonderful to complete that journey and go back there as a well man, shooting again with the same two people, and just have a beer and celebrate that journey. So the scene top left is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. I have been to Bilbao probably most years in the past 20. It's where my wife Yayone is from. In fact, I proposed behind the Guggenheim Museum. The point here is about being curious and staying alert and staying creative. So the scene on the right is a shot I took of the Guggenheim Museum just this year. And it's probably the most creative shot I've managed to take of the Guggenheim in that whole period of time. Top left is a scene that hundreds of thousands of photographers have in their belt. Bottom right is not a scene that many have. They'll probably start to emulate it now. But just taking a step back, looking at the environment, what's my different angle on this? This is me basically dangling over a railway bridge. So it's a little bit of risk there. But the reward in terms of getting a scene that's absolutely unique is just wonderful for me. Talking of unique scenes, so this is Paris, where I went with my day job this year. And my boss said to me, he said, "So what are you going to do this evening?" I said, I've got to go out and try and get a unique shot of the Eiffel Tower. And he just laughed. He said, "A unique shot of the Eiffel Tower? It's impossible." And I said, "Well, I'll do my best." And I've got to admit, I was thinking, I have set myself a bit of a challenge. And then there's this, I don't know the names of it, but there's this massive pond between the Eiffel Tower and this large building where a lot of shots of the Eiffel Tower are taken. And I must have hit on the 2 days every decade that they drain the pond. And this lamp here is usually underwater, illuminating the pond so that the fish can be seen swimming around and everything. And I couldn't believe my luck. There was absolutely nobody in this drained pond. So I was straight down there, and I must have shot this angle for this height, this height, this height, this height, this height, this height, probably 200 times, just until you get things absolutely perfect and spot on. And then the lights came on, and it was just this absolute crescendo of everything coming together. So it might not be the best shot ever of the Eiffel Tower, but it's certainly pretty unique, and it's probably going to be a long time before anyone can emulate that again. So just always be alert and look for those opportunities to get something special. So if my career has really allowed me to explore the world and in many ways funded my photography, people often ask me, well, why don't you make photography your career? And I feel really privileged that I've got a day job that I love and a passion in photography that I love, but I didn't really have a purpose, and what was it directed towards? And I think through my cancer experience, it's really helped me understand that my photography purpose is community. So it's been giving back to the cancer community was a big part of it. We've raised something like $40,000 in the past year through that book and associated print. So that's just, I'm delighted to make that donation. And I couldn't do that if photography was my career, because I'd need the money. The other element for me is Colorado community, and I discovered not so long ago the wild mustangs in northwest Colorado. I think there's a slide coming up that shows that. But Yeah, and now I travel maybe once every 2 or 3 months up to Maybell. If you don't know it, go up there. It's just not far off the border with Wyoming. And there's 300 or 400 horses running wild. I mean, these are absolutely stunning horses. They're not easy to find. There's 160,000 acres, so you have to kind of track them down. But again, this just gave me another purpose. So I now donate any sales that I make of these horses to the Sandwash advocacy team, which looks after these horses. In fact, the reason I'm wearing a check shirt today is that we're going to a fundraising dinner for them this evening. So I'll have my cowboy hat on later. And then the wildlife passion is still there. So I'd say I already have enough in the bag to produce a Through the Window 2 at this point. Although that's not necessarily on the cards, but just keeping that genre up. And I'd say I'm absolutely confirmed as a landscape and wildlife photographer these days. Part of community for me is also giving back to the people that support our family. So I shoot my kids' sports events through the whole chemo while I wasn't allowed in sunshine. I didn't miss one sports event through that whole time. And I was the kind of surreptitious, suspicious looking guy in the corner of the track with the big hat, the face all covered, the coat, because I just couldn't allow sunlight anywhere. But managed to get some tremendous shots out of it, and we were able to donate a 22-inch black and white print to every single child in my son's varsity team at school last year. And again, that's just such a massive reward. It doesn't need to be a financial reward. Just seeing what can come back from the joy of people seeing themselves in action like that. Before I conclude, I often get asked, about kit, and I thought it was worth just skipping through a couple of slides on basically what's in the kit bag, because you're covering sports, wildlife, landscape, and people. That's quite a number of genre there to try and cover in one bag. So I carry a couple of D4s and a D810, which is a large file camera. The reason those are different, for sports and wildlife, you need the fastest camera possible. A very large file camera, because of the processing speed, can't get as fast as a smaller file camera. So although the D4 is far more expensive than the other one, it only has 16 to 20 megabyte files, but it can process them at 14 frames a second. That's why you're able to capture hummingbirds and puffins. The D810, the smaller camera, has file sizes of 35 megabytes. So that means you can just take an absolutely expansive landscape and just see every single pixel as clear as day. In many ways, the D810's now been superseded by the D850, which is 45 megabytes. I mean, these cameras are just getting massive. You could fill a bus side with images you can get out of these cameras today. It's just extraordinary compared to that F65 that I showed you at the beginning. There you've got a 600, 400, 300, 7200 mil lens. My favorite lens, the one that's absolutely welded to the front of my D810, is the 14 to 24 wide angle lens, and it's probably the lens that's my go-to lens, and it's certainly my desert island lens, the one I use most. I put the iPhone up there though because you've got to recognize the power of phone cameras these days, and I don't always carry a DSLR, but I always have my camera, and some of my favorite photos of the last couple of years have been shot with an iPhone. And again, the capability that's built into these cameras these days is absolutely extraordinary. So never feel awkward about taking photos with an iPhone. It's just a great tool and very, very publishable. In terms of kit as well, there's that $1,200 tripod that replaced the fractured one. Different heads though. So the gimbal head, which is the second image along from the left, is ideal for wildlife because it allows you to track animals, move from left to right or up and down, completely fluid. The head, which is second from the right, is a landscape head, which is absolutely rock solid and tight, and you just won't get any movement at all in there. And then a monopod, which I use for the sports photography. But some of the most interesting things are the other bits in the kit bag. So I've talked to you already about the filters. That's a remote trigger there, which is absolutely essential if you're going to be doing night sky photography. The flashlight that I talked earlier, a headlight, otherwise you won't find your way back from the sand dunes in the middle of the night. People often ask me about this. This is sea waders, which allows you to get much deeper in the water and much lower. So it's probably one of my least used assets in Colorado, shall we say. Something that didn't fit in the kit bag but really made a difference recently is a canoe. And again, this is just about being creative and thinking about things differently. We were up at a beautiful area in Colorado called Piney Lake, and I was hoping to see moose, and I was lucky enough to see moose. And my instinct was to walk round, and it would probably have about taken half an hour. Luckily, I had a friend with me who said, let's just row across in a canoe. And the consequence is you're just getting this absolute crystal, eye-level interaction with an animal, which gives this extra level of elevation among normal moose shots, if you like. The black and white touch was my own, if you like. The real message here is about using resources that are at your disposal to just get different images and just add an element there. This session has been very much about me giving advice in photography, but I've obviously received some amazing advice myself through my career. And I remember about 12 years ago, the same editor that commissioned me for the Advanced Photographer Seascape feature, I heard him speak at a photo exhibition one night. This is Will Chung. And he looked out at the audience and said, "Oh, you sports photographers and wildlife photographers and portrait photographers, so you're all brilliant," he said, "but you don't use your talent enough on your family." And he said, "I guarantee when you're in your dotage and you're looking back at your photo albums of this great maroon bell shot and this great hummingbird," he said, "you need photos of your family." And I've carried that message with me all the time. So alongside sports and wildlife and landscape, I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that I've got a portfolio of family photography. So this is my daughter Alba, who's actually at the back of the room. She's now 13, so this is shot quite a long time ago. My wife Ione, and both children there, Andrew and Alba. And this is them in a much more sort of dynamic frame in sports. And again, as I say, I'd endeavour to capture all of their events. So that really is it. I mean, that's my photographic career, if you like, in a nutshell. But I think I wanted to end on that emotional point of all the images that I've shown you today. I'm tremendously proud of all of them, but it's the family that probably means the most. It's the family I'll take forward. So if you have a choice about where to apply your professionalism, make sure that's something that will give you an absolutely emotional joy back. So this is the website that I've launched recently called wilsonaxby.com. So that's only been up a couple of months now. All sales through that website are absolutely go to the cancer charity, which has done so much to help me, apart from the horses, which goes to support the Sandwash Basin team. So feel free to browse there. Hopefully you see something that inspires you. I'm not here to do a hard sell. This was really about me telling my story and hopefully inspiring you to love photography. But if you do want to follow up, then please do feel free. So that's it for me. It's been very special for me to talk to you today. I'm very aware of the TV and bright lights, so it's hopefully it's come across okay. But thanks very much for listening and taking the time out on a Saturday to join me. Thank you.